Madison's eyes remained fixed on the floor as the courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. Everyone had underestimated her. For days, she sat motionless, absorbing insult after insult. Her ex-husband's lawyer painting her as a failure, a neglectful mother. The audience had written her off as a woman broken by the very system that once elevated her. But when the Judge Stevens, leaned forward and asked the question that no one saw coming, "Ms. Madison, why have you stayed silent all this time? What is it you're hiding?" The entire room froze. In that moment, Madison's silence cracked, and the truth began to unravel, shattering her ex-husband's empire with a single answer. For days, Brandon, the powerful billionaire CEO, sat smugly in the courtroom, convinced that he had already won. His attorney had painted Madison as a woman who couldn't possibly compete with his wealth, his power, and his perfectly curated image. But Madison wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She had been waiting for this exact moment. As the judge's question hung in the air, the world around Madison seemed to pause. What would she reveal? What had she been holding back? The entire courtroom had thought they knew the outcome, but Madison was about to show them that they had no idea who they were dealing with. What happened next would change everything. And it wasn't just about winning a custody battle. It was about exposing a lie that had been building for years. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you all so much. It's been a tough ride with some technical issues, but by God's grace, we're getting everything back on track. Thank you for sticking with me. Your support means everything. Before we begin, I want to say a little prayer over everyone watching, especially the women. To the women, may God strengthen you, comfort you, and fill your heart with peace and favor. To the men, may God guide you, bless your efforts, and give you wisdom in all you do. And may God's protection rest on every single one of you. Amen. If you're ready for today's story, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My USA and UK family, I see you. And please watch till the end, because tomorrow I'll be dropping another story you wouldn't want to miss. Now, let's get into the story. Madison didn't flinch. Not once. Not even when Brandon's lawyer, Derek Hargrove, pounded his fist on the table, spitting out accusations as if they were facts. For hours, the courtroom had been a relentless storm of slander. Hargrove's voice was a hammer, smashing against her reputation, her motherhood, and her very being. "She's financially irresponsible," Hargrove argued, his sharp eyes darting to the jury. "She's failed to keep up with basic responsibilities as any decent mother would. Her spending habits, reckless. Her home, a mess. How can we possibly trust a woman who's incapable of handling her own life to properly care for their daughter?" Madison's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, as if she hadn't heard him. She felt the weight of each word land with the precision of a punch, but she didn't react. Her lawyer, Priya Sharma, shifted in her seat, clutching her notes with white-knuckled intensity. The sweat beaded on Priya's brow as Hargrove continued his assault. "And let's not forget the emotional volatility," Hargrove added, his voice dripping with venom. "She's unstable, and she's projecting that onto Ava. How can this court, knowing the child's fragile emotional state, allow a mother like this to have full custody?" The room hummed with the low murmur of whispers, some from the jury, others from the gallery. Madison could almost hear the judgment in the air. She could feel the weight of their eyes, the scorn, the pity. Some people had already written her off. She was just the ex-wife after all, the one who had lost. She wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Madison had been planning this moment for months. While Brandon's world had been one of suits and wealth and power, her world had been one of quiet observation. She knew how to sit back and watch, to gather the evidence, to wait. And she had been waiting. Priya looked over at her, her face a mask of concern. Madison, we need to respond to this. We can't let him paint you as unfit. They're attacking your credibility. Madison's lips parted slightly, but she remained silent. Her fingers lightly tapped the edge of the table, a soft rhythm, almost imperceptible. Not yet, she whispered under her breath, more to herself than to Priya. The room was thick with tension, but Madison wasn't worried. She knew the truth was coming. Hargrove shifted, glancing at the judge before continuing. And let's talk about the emotional damage this woman has caused. We have expert testimony from Ava's therapist, who has stated that the child is clearly suffering from anxiety from the constant chaos at home. How could we possibly trust that Madison is the best person for Ava's well-being, Your Honor? Madison's hands curled into fists beneath the table. She wanted to stand up, to shout that the chaos wasn't hers, that it was Brandon who had caused it. He was the one who had poisoned their marriage with ambition and neglect. But she didn't move. Not yet. Priya's eyes flicked between Madison and the jury, her face tightening. She wasn't sure how much more she could take before everything fell apart. Madison's silence was beginning to wear on her. How could her client remain so calm when everything was crashing down around them? When Hargrove's words were so sharp, so calculated, cutting through Madison's defenses like a knife through paper? Priya leaned forward and whispered, "Madison, I need you to give me something. They're burying us, and I don't know how much longer I can hold this together. Please, just speak." Madison's calm was unnerving, even to Priya. She'd seen clients break, seen them crack under pressure, but Madison was an enigma. A woman who had always been so fiercely independent, so intelligent, now reduced to this quiet shell in the face of overwhelming adversity. And yet, Priya couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on, something beneath the surface. She just didn't know what. Madison's eyes flickered to the jury, then to Brandon, who sat smugly across the room, his face locked in an expression of cold certainty. His lawyer was winning, and he knew it. The smile on his face was a reminder of everything Madison had once believed in, a life of luxury, comfort, and promises. And now she was fighting for her daughter, fighting for the truth. The silence in the courtroom deepened as Hargrove's arguments began to wind down. But Madison wasn't broken. Far from it. She was just waiting. The game wasn't over, not yet. The judge, Judge Stevens, cleared her throat, her sharp eyes cutting through the tension. She turned toward Priya and nodded. "Miss Sharma, would you like to make a statement in response?" Priya opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. Madison's steady gaze was a beacon of calm in the storm of lies swirling around her. "Not yet," Madison whispered again, her voice a thread of steel. The room fell silent. It was clear Madison had a plan. Hargrove's confident smirk faded as he watched her. He had been expecting a breakdown, a defense that would crumble under the pressure. But he hadn't counted on this. He hadn't counted on the silence. Priya stared at Madison, the words she had prepared in her head suddenly slipping away. There was nothing she could say that would compare to the strength in Madison's silence. But still, she needed to keep up the fight. "Your Honor," Priya said, her voice steadying, "my client has endured these accusations without response because she has been the one to raise their daughter. She has given everything to Ava, and it's clear these allegations are nothing but a smokescreen to hide Brandon's true intentions. He's not concerned with Ava's well-being. He's concerned with his wealth, his image, and his control over this family." The judge nodded, acknowledging Priya's statement. But even as she spoke, Priya knew it wouldn't be enough. Hargrove had already planted the seeds of doubt. The jury was listening, absorbing everything Brandon's lawyer was feeding them. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter." Madison closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow, measured breath. She knew what was coming next. The lies had been building for days, but the truth would come. She was certain of it. She had to be. In the courtroom, all eyes were on Madison as the tension stretched like a rubber band, taut, waiting to snap. What would she do? Would she fight back? Would she crumble under the pressure? The answer was simple. Madison wasn't going to fight. She was going to win. Sometimes we're all made to feel small. Have you ever been underestimated? You have no idea the strength someone's hiding, but they'll reveal it when the time is right. Will you stand with them when they do? And when that moment came, it would be unstoppable. Before Madison became a wife, a mother, and the quiet figure sitting in the courtroom, she was a force to be reckoned with. A sharp, driven investigative journalist whose ability to uncover financial corruption had made her a name in the industry. In her early years, Madison worked for the Washington Ledger, where she exposed some of the most complex corporate fraud schemes in the country. Her eye for detail was unparalleled. No small discrepancy slipped past her. She could track down the source of a fraudulent transaction just by the faintest trail left behind, whether it was a mismatched number in a financial report or a suspiciously large wire transfer. Her reputation in the world of investigative journalism was built on this skill, and she was known for connecting dots no one else could see. Flashbacks to those days played like a film reel in Madison's mind as she sat in the courtroom, listening to the accusations being thrown her way. She remembered the late nights spent combing through financial documents, the adrenaline of uncovering hidden assets, and the satisfaction of watching corrupt executives fall from grace. It wasn't just a career. It was her purpose. She knew how to dig deep, how to find the truth, even when it was buried beneath layers of lies and deception. As Brandon's financial dealings came under scrutiny during the trial, Madison's investigative instincts started to kick in. She began to see patterns that didn't add up. It was as if she had returned to her old life, where every number, every document, and every hidden trail held a clue to unraveling the truth about Brandon's empire. And she knew in this quiet moment, she was about to use those skills to expose him. The more Madison observed, the clearer it became. Brandon's story didn't add up. The claims of financial struggle, the narrative he had built around his empire crumbling, everything felt too perfect, too rehearsed. As she sifted through the documents, her journalist instincts took over, and soon her quiet moments in the courtroom turned into long nights of quiet investigation. It started with small discrepancies, numbers that didn't quite match up, vague references to business losses that had no supporting evidence. She dug deeper. There were off-the-record transactions, quick shifts in asset ownership, and investments that had been moved around with no real explanation. A gut feeling began to grow within her, and as she uncovered more, she felt a wave of certainty wash over her. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. This was deliberate. The most shocking discovery came when Madison stumbled upon a series of offshore accounts linked to Brandon's companies. Accounts that had never been disclosed in the divorce filings. Hidden millions, quietly stashed away in shell companies across Europe and the Caribbean. It was a perfect web of deceit. Brandon had made it look like he was struggling financially, manipulating the court and anyone who would listen into thinking he was doing everything he could to support their daughter. With each new piece of evidence, Madison's confidence grew. She could feel the shift. This wasn't just about a custody battle anymore. It was about exposing the truth. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. Every lie Brandon had told, every manipulation was about to come to light. But she stayed silent. She wasn't finished yet. The pieces were almost in place. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable, thick enough to cut with a knife. For days, Madison had been nothing but a passive observer, the weight of the accusations heaped on her shoulders without a word of defense. Brandon's lawyer had dismantled her character, her finances, her motherhood, piece by piece. The jury's eyes were on her, and though the whispers had started to die down, they hadn't stopped. Everyone was waiting for her to say something, anything that might turn the tide in her favor. But she didn't. Then, as the day's proceedings drew to a close, Judge Stevens, who had remained silent throughout, leaned forward. Her voice, sharp and steady, cut through the air. "Ms. Madison, can you explain why you've waited so long to speak?" The words rang in the stillness, reverberating through the room. "What is it you've been hiding?" The question hung in the air like a charged wire. Everyone turned toward her. Even Brandon, confident in his victory, shifted in his seat. It wasn't just a question. It was an invitation, an opening. For a brief moment, Madison didn't move. The room was so quiet, it was as if the entire world had paused. She stood slowly, deliberately, her eyes glinting with an unspoken resolve. Every step she took toward the judge was measured, calculated. Her pulse was steady, her heart surprisingly calm. "Your Honor," Madison said, her voice clear and firm, "I've been waiting for this question because the truth was never meant to be hidden. It was always meant to be revealed at the right time." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is wait. Wait for the moment that will turn everything in your favor. Will you have the patience to trust in your own power when your moment comes? Madison stood at the center of the courtroom, the silence thick and heavy around her. The flash drive in her hand felt surprisingly light, yet she knew it contained everything she needed to destroy the illusion Brandon had carefully constructed. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with anticipation. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She walked to the bailiff, her every step deliberate. The room held its breath, the eyes of the jury, the judge, and even Brandon trained on her. Without a word, she handed the flash drive over. She turned to the court and spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, I would like to submit evidence that directly contradicts everything Mr. Blake has told you about his financial situation." The bailiff plugged the drive into the computer, and within moments, the screen flickered to life. The room fell into stunned silence as emails, bank transfers, and financial statements filled the screen. Madison had anticipated this moment for weeks, but even now, seeing the truth unfold before the eyes of everyone in the room felt like an explosion. The first document appeared, a series of wire transfers from shell companies, accounts that had never been disclosed. Then came emails detailing Brandon's communications with offshore banking institutions, carefully hidden assets, and deliberate efforts to mask his true wealth. As the document scrolled, the room was alive with murmurs. Brandon's face went pale. His hands, which had been steady on the table moments before, now clenched into fists. He leaned forward, his eyes wide with panic. His empire, built on lies, was beginning to collapse. Madison remained still, watching as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. This was the moment when the truth would be impossible to ignore. The courtroom, once filled with murmurs of doubt about Madison's strategy, now hummed with shock and disbelief. The evidence on the screen was irrefutable. Madison's meticulous research had painted a damning portrait of Brandon's deception, and his carefully crafted persona as a struggling entrepreneur was crumbling before his eyes. Brandon shifted in his seat, his confident composure cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he glanced at his lawyer, Derek Hargrove, who was now visibly uncomfortable, rifling through his notes. Hargrove stood up, attempting to steady the situation. "Objection, Your Honor," he barked, his voice shaky. "These documents are fabricated. They don't prove anything. This is a baseless attack on my client's character." The room fell into stunned silence. No one moved as the judge, Judge Stevens, raised an eyebrow and looked over at Hargrove. She didn't speak immediately, simply waited, watching Brandon's increasingly frantic gestures. "I would like to remind counsel that these documents have already been submitted and verified," Judge Stevens said coolly, her voice slicing through the tension. "Please continue, Ms. Madison." Brandon's face twisted in desperation. He leaned over to Hargrove, whispering furiously. The lawyer nodded, but it was clear to everyone. Brandon's bravado had evaporated. The evidence was real, and there was no escaping the truth. Madison stood silent, her gaze unwavering. She watched him struggle, his empire of lies buckling under the weight of her revelation. Every word he had spoken, every manipulation, every false narrative, all of it was falling apart in front of the court. And she was calm, resolved. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Judge Stevens turned her gaze back to Brandon, her expression hardening. Even she seemed taken aback by the extent of his deceit. "It seems, Mr. Blake, that the truth is no longer optional," she said softly, but with finality. Brandon's empire was collapsing in real time, piece by piece, as the documents continued to unfold on the screen. The shell companies, the hidden assets, the fabricated losses, all of it exposed. His carefully constructed facade of a self-made billionaire was shattered, and in its place, the cold, harsh truth was laid bare for the courtroom to see. His mouth had gone dry. His shoulders sagged. Even his lawyer, Hargrove, seemed lost for words. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with disbelief. Brandon shifted in his seat, his arrogance replaced by a visible sense of panic. The world he had spent years building, his business empire, his status, his carefully maintained reputation, was unraveling before him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His attempts to deny the evidence had failed. His pride had been replaced by something far worse: fear. Madison remained composed, her hands resting gently on the table, the corners of her mouth barely lifting in a hint of resolve. The silence she had maintained throughout the trial now felt like a distant memory. She had waited, and now the moment had come. Priya, her lawyer, stood confidently, holding the smoking gun of the newly revealed evidence. She turned to Judge Stevens and presented her case. "Your Honor, the defendant's dishonesty has not only endangered his business dealings, but it has also directly impacted his ability to care for his daughter. Ava deserves a stable home, a home where the truth matters more than wealth." The words hit like a hammer. The evidence had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Brandon's claims of financial hardship were nothing but manipulation. And in that moment, Madison knew she had won. Ava's custody was granted to Madison, a quiet victory, but one that spoke volumes. Brandon had lost everything. The courtroom doors closed behind Madison with a soft click, but it felt like the closing of an era. A long, painful chapter in her life was finally over. She stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the doorframe, staring out into the hallway. The weight that had been bearing down on her for years, the lies, the manipulation, the doubt, was gone. The truth had won. In the past weeks, she had been accused of everything. Her worth had been reduced to a handful of assumptions: the unfit mother, the failed wife, the woman who had been left behind. But those assumptions hadn't been hers to carry. She had always known who she was beneath the surface: someone strong, capable, and relentless in her pursuit of justice. That was who she was, and she had made it through because of her quiet strength. Now, as she walked out of the courtroom, her head held high, she thought back to how it had all started. Her marriage to Brandon had been a dream at first. She had believed in him. She had stood by his side when things were tough, when he was just starting his business, and they lived in a cramped apartment in D.C. She had believed in him when the tech empire he built became the envy of the industry. But somewhere along the way, his ambition had transformed him. He became a man who valued power more than truth, who thought that money could solve everything, even his mistakes. Madison had learned that the hard way. Her patience had been the key. Every accusation, every lie thrown at her had been nothing but noise, a distraction from her true goal. For months, she had stayed silent, waiting for the moment when she would expose the truth. That moment had arrived in the courtroom, and now it was over. The man who had controlled so much of her life, whose empire had loomed over her for years, was collapsing. His lies had caught up with him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Brandon's financial empire was now in tatters. His fraudulent accounts were exposed, and his reputation was in shambles. As the court ruled in her favor, awarding her full custody of Ava, Madison felt a rush of relief. She had won, not just a custody battle, but her freedom. Ava's future, once uncertain, now had a foundation built on truth. The walls that had confined her were now crumbling. The truth had set her free. But it wasn't just the courtroom victory that mattered. It was what came after. Madison knew that her real victory wasn't in the legal battles or the destruction of Brandon's empire. It was in the life she was about to rebuild with Ava. The future was now wide open. She had learned a valuable lesson. Justice didn't always come in the form of loud victories or dramatic moments. Sometimes, it came in the quiet moments when you stood tall, when you refused to let someone else's lies define you. As Madison walked out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight, she knew that her journey was just beginning. She had her daughter, her dignity, and the truth on her side, and that was all she needed. Sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of loud victories. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments when we stand tall against those who've wronged us. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing, because standing up for what's right is the most powerful thing you can do. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out, and do well to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next story.